But from America came the strong, it cannot be so bad if the Americans translate everything and appoint these people, etc. So the fundamental philosophy you attribute to Europe needed the superficial Americans to be convincing in its own country.
I don't think of Americans as superficial, but anyway, yeah.
All so-called, certainly.
Tim had a question.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a question so much as a response to what I heard you saying, and I think that I'm going to be formulating this as I talk, so I apologize if there's some lack of coherence. But I think that you identified, beginning last year when you started to describe the foundations of the Center for Modern Thought, of separating the disciplines in order to then find possibilities for cross-fertilization. And I think that there is a characterization of that method that reflects how you characterize your identification with Europe in terms of finding history or finding memory in its place in each culture. And then I think that maybe the difficulty is in the translation of that to the minority communities within the US, where you say you find also a certain amount of memory or history, that actually begins in the hybrid, begins in the cross-fertilization, and then goes upward into, so rather than being a separation of the lack of history, and what I find often Europeans saying that what they gain by moving to the US is the freedom from exactly this history and memory that you're talking about, the ability to work, you know, as you said, the future, you see the future of American philosophy in this cross-fertilization, this hybridization, as a starting point, as opposed to the start being in the roots itself. So I think that, you know, since it seems like when, you know, given the institution that you have, and your goal for the institution does seem that it has a sense in alignment with the geopolitical situation that it's in, to if I consider the character of the US, the potential of the US, and at the same time, not the shallowness, but perhaps the facileness, where the thought of, you know, the introduced deconstruction and so on takes root in the US and runs along many highways.
Let me jump in while a thought comes to mind. One of the reasons that I'm uneasy about the line that I took in this paper is that I'm just all too acutely aware that I've never had a chance to work in places like Chile or Japan or you know, places where I know people who are doing interesting work. So one of the reasons that I'm not in a very good position to speak comparatively in that respect, but there's no question that when I thought of moving to Scotland, what was appealing to me was leaving a site that takes itself as the center of the, you know, of all intellectual and economic relations. So when one comes to Europe from America, one is immediately aware of different axes, you know, in the global order, both in terms of economic relations, but also intellectual and cultural. So what interested me most when I first came was leaving a place that was diluted into thinking of itself as the center. Now, obviously, you can come back to, you know, talk about Europe in that sense. But Europe, I think, today is more and more open to these different lines of communication, different axes of influence. And so, in a certain sense, that maybe that's part of what I've been searching for, that sense of you know, following what you're saying, opening to a different constellation of like I say, lines of force, you know, whether it's socioeconomic or intellectual. And you know, I might have a, you know, it might be what I'm trying to describe might be equally the case in Japan or in Chile, two places where I know people that I respect very, very highly. Yeah.
Can you actually also understand the other way around? I mean, as a composer, as a European composer, I feel completely trapped in the historicism. I mean, it's a nightmare getting out, and I'm always extremely jealous about these American composers who don't care. about any cultural history. I don't know how is it in philosophy, but that's how I see this discussion about historicism.
Yeah, well, I know what you're saying. I can't speak for music, really, at all. I mean, this is what, you know, I think several of the questions have been about this. Well, aren't you seeking, in a certain sense, that experience of the foreign, or that experience of a shift in context that in a certain sense liberates from whatever the constraining habits might be from where you're coming? Yes, I mean, absolutely. But here I was playing with something a little bit more. I was trying to sort of sketch a geopolitical framework, and so I'm trying to get past simply the idea. Well, okay, it's an open. Going to the foreign allows a different relation to the to the proper or to the home. That you know, this shift into a different context allows a kind of liberation of perspective, which then frees one up to be more in touch with what one is seeking. I mean, I know that I'm translating what you're saying a bit, but I wonder if what you're saying doesn't come to that ultimately one seeks, you know, the artists or even the philosopher goes to the United States and experiences that more flat, open. Cultural horizon, and feels a kind of liberty, is freed to what it is they've been trying to achieve from where they've come, right? So it's not becoming American.
No. Actually, I'm talking of Native American composers, where you really feel in the music that they don't have this luggage. Mm. Like Charles Ives or so, he just doesn't care about history. He's just doing several things at the same time and is happy about it. And it's so it's not about going to the foreign country. What I'm talking about. That's actually how I understood you. That it's kind of immanent in the European culture, this historicism. And so. Well, I guess what I wanted to ask is, as an American philosopher, you don't have the feeling that, okay, I can think what I want.
In America?
Yeah.
Sure, but, I mean, the point that I was trying to make was that that freedom became debilitating at a certain point. That there was no, well, that freedom, along with many other constraints, you know, in a context where there's an incredible policing of intellectual life in North American institutions, extraordinary policing of all sorts. So this freedom, yes, one feels it in the broader sense in America. I mean, there's all sorts of places to escape to and all sorts of forms of escape. But what I was trying to describe was in a situation where there is such policing going on in the institutions and so little a possibility of community, that this freedom becomes debilitating. I could do whatever I wanted, yes, absolutely, but I began to wonder why. To whom am I speaking? What for? Certainly it wasn't enough to satisfy me that I was writing books for myself. I mean, and there are, you know, certainly there are people who have the inner drive, I suppose, that do that, you know, and they're not worried about it. But for me, I've always felt that if I'm going to be doing philosophy or talking about text or something, I want to be doing it in a way that where I sense that I'm connecting with people, contributing to something, you know, where what I'm doing has some meaning beyond my immediate contributions. And there I began to feel that it simply was not possible. So that's the description, the situation. Yeah.
I will have a question for you because you are in a European university, I'm an European. And what really strikes me most today in Europe is the fact that the entire European Union is disinvesting in education. Being at a European university, how do you feel that? And how do you think that will affect the development of thought in Europe? Because academia has been the place for the philosophers all the time. And many schools in Europe now are closing their program on philosophy and many others. So I was really surprised to see the way that you are presenting such a positive